Horizon had been sitting in the dark void of the Lorien expanse for over an hour now, the eerie silence pressing in from all sides. The crew, though experienced in navigating the unknown reaches of space, could feel something unnameable, something chilling, moving just beyond the thin veil of ordinary reality. Ilara Juno, the ship's commander, stood at the helm, eyes locked on the still flickering image of the abandoned mining station on the view screen. The station's battered silhouette loomed against the endless backdrop of stars, a rusted hulk of forgotten industry, its lights faint and intermittent. The crew of the Horizon had expected silence, but the silence here felt different. It was too thick, too oppressive. The air on the bridge had a weight to it that none of them could shake off, a constant hum in the back of their minds, telling them that they were not alone. Even as the ship's engines hummed softly and the systems performed their routine checks, the crew knew they were on the edge of something vast and terrible. "Are we sure this is the right place?" Lieutenant Cale Thorne's voice cut through the tension, though it was tinged with unease. He leaned over his console, his fingers frozen on the controls as he stared at the station's coordinates. "Positive," Ilara replied, her voice steady but hard, a practiced calm she used in moments like this. "This is where the distress signal came from." "But that was weeks ago," Cale pointed out, his brow furrowing as he looked from the readings to Ilara. "If the Deathworlders have already moved, why would the distress signal still be active? And why isn't there any sign of activity here?" "Maybe they're still in the system," Ilara mused, her mind racing. She gripped the armrests of her chair as she leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Or maybe they're waiting." A low thud echoed through the ship, a hollow reverberation that sent a shiver up the spines of the crew. The ship shuddered again, followed by a sudden warning from the sensors. "We've got a gravimetric anomaly approaching fast," Cale reported, his voice laced with urgency. "It's not natural. Something's pulling at the fabric of space itself. Should we pull out?" "No," Ilara said, her voice cold with resolve. "If we leave now, we'll never know what happened here. Full shields, weapons ready. We go in. But stay sharp." Finally, the Horizon crept closer to the station, the weight of the unknown pressing heavier as the ship closed the distance. The crew was tense, every noise amplified in the silence. The docking bay appeared ahead, its open maw dark and silent. But something was different. A faint glow pulsed from within, like a heartbeat just beneath the surface. It wasn't a natural glow, more like an artificial light struggling to stay on, flickering intermittently in a steady rhythm. "Lock in docking procedures," Ilara ordered. Her voice was firm, though inside she was bracing herself. They were about to find out what lay hidden in the shadows. The Horizon docked with a soft hiss, the airlock sealing with a smooth, practiced motion. The crew moved quickly to prepare, weapons drawn, helmets on. Ilara led the way as they stepped into the station's dimly lit docking bay, the sound of their boots clanging against the cold metal floor echoing unnervingly in the hollow space. The temperature was off too cold for comfort, but not cold enough to freeze. The air had that stale, old quality to it, as if the station had been closed off for years. But even as the air filtration systems hummed to life, something still felt off. The light, dim as it was, cast long, twisted shadows that seemed to stretch just a little too far. "What do you make of this, Thorne?" Lara asked, keeping her voice low, alert. "I don't know," Kill muttered, scanning the area with his rifle at the ready. "It's like they just vanished. But everything's still functioning. The power's still running. We should be seeing signs of life, but there's nothing." They moved down the station's central corridor, the lights flickering in their wake, casting brief shadows on the walls. The hum of the station was steady, like a distant heartbeat, but the crew couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. The air felt charged, as if the station itself was holding its breath. As they neared the command center, a sudden crackle of static from their comms cut through the silence. Elara froze, her hand instinctively going to the sidearm at her belt. The static cleared, revealing a faint, distorted voice. "The fleet is here. It's... oh, too late. We are already dead. I'm sorry." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving the crew in an oppressive silence. Elara's stomach twisted with unease, but she pushed it down. This wasn't the time to lose focus. Whoever had sent that transmission was long gone, likely dead. And they were left to deal with the aftermath. She moved toward the control room, her boots clicking with purpose on the metal floor. As she entered the command center, she immediately noticed the destruction. Panels were torn open, wires hanging loose from the walls, and the holoscreen flickered intermittently with static, struggling to maintain any semblance of order. But it was the message that had been left on the screen that caught her attention. A single sentence, encrypted and flashing with urgency. "You are being watched. Do not trust what you see. The Deathworlders are coming, and they are not what you think." Elara's breath caught in her throat. She stared at the words, her mind racing as she tried to decipher their meaning. She had heard the rumors, the hushed whispers of the Deathworlders, an enigmatic and savage race that had begun to make their presence known in the galaxy. They were the stuff of legends, feared and loathed in equal measure. But this was something else entirely. Whoever had written this message had known far more than the average person. "Can you decrypt it?" Elara asked Kale, her voice tight. Kale was already working at the console, his fingers flying across the keys as he tried to break the encryption. It was a complex algorithm, and Elara could see the sweat forming on his brow. He was good, but this wasn't like anything he'd encountered before. After a long moment he looked up, his face pale. "There's no way we're getting through this without the right key," he said. "But I think I've isolated the source. It's coming from deeper within the station, or I've found it." "Where did you find it?" "We're going after it," Elara said, her voice low and dangerous. "We need to know what happened here." The crew moved quickly, their pace quickening as they descended deeper into the bowels of the station. The further they went, the more the station seemed to change. The walls were no longer the utilitarian metal sheathing of the upper levels. Here the hallways were narrow, winding, and covered in strange symbols and markings that seemed out of place. Some looked like old-world language, while others were more abstract, alien, and unfamiliar. "We're not alone," Kale muttered, his voice low but filled with certainty. Elara didn't answer. Her instincts were screaming now. Whatever had happened here, whatever had caused this station to fall into disarray, it was far worse than any of them had imagined. There was something alive here, something that was waiting, watching. They reached the lower levels of the station, and there, nestled in the heart of the ruins, they found the source of the message. A small, makeshift control room, its walls lined with cables and strange devices that none of them recognized. The air was thick with the smell of burnt circuitry, and in the center of the room was a single figure, hunched over a console. "Hold it right there," Elara barked, aiming her rifle at the figure. The others did the same. The figure froze, slowly turning toward them. It was a man, or at least it looked like one. But his eyes, they were wide, filled with a terrifying emptiness, as if he had seen things that no one should ever witness. His clothes were torn, and his skin had a sickly pallor, as though he hadn't seen sunlight in weeks. "You're too late," the man whispered, his voice a rasping, broken thing. "They're coming!" Before anyone could react, the ground shook violently, a deep rumbling that felt like it was coming from the very core of the station. A massive explosion echoed through the halls, followed by the sound of metal twisting and groaning under immense pressure. The lights flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness. Ilara's hand instinctively went to her comms. "Status report. Kale, can you—" But before she could finish, the figure spoke again, his voice a low, guttural growl. "They are coming," he rasped. "The Deathworlders, they've already found us." The room shook again, this time with greater force, and Ilara felt the air in her lungs tighten as a shadow moved through the darkness, its shape impossible to fully comprehend. There was no time left. The Deathworlders were here, and this time they weren't coming as strangers. They were coming as conquerors. The crew of the Horizon sat in an uneasy silence, their eyes fixed on the blaring alert on the bridge. A deep red warning light bathed the room in a sickly glow, casting long shadows over the sleek consoles and panels. The hum of the ship's engines was drowned by the harsh beeping of the comms array. Commander Ilara Juno gripped the edge of her chair, her knuckles white as she stared at the signal emanating from the deep reaches of the galaxy. The transmission was faint, barely audible, and heavily garbled, but the message was clear enough. 07.2G. NTV comparison potential. Ilara frowned. The Deathworlders. A name spoken in hushed tones across the galaxy. The mysterious, ruthless, and enigmatic species that had only recently made their presence known. No one knew where they came from or how they'd managed to build their terrifyingly powerful fleet. But now, they were on the move, and the galaxy was starting to notice. "Get me the source coordinates," Ilara ordered, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her gut. Lieutenant Cale Thorne, a tall, wiry man with sharp features and an analytical mind, worked quickly at his console. His fingers flew across the keys, tracking the signal through layers of space and interference. Finally, he looked up, his face grim. "Got it, Commander," he said, pointing to the display. "It's coming from a system in the outer rim, just outside the Lorian expanse." Ilara nodded, her mind already running through the possibilities. The Lorian expanse was a vast, desolate stretch of space filled with dangerous anomalies, unstable stars, and ancient ruins. It was the kind of place few dared to venture, and now a distress signal was coming from it, one that spoke of the Deathworlders. "Prepare the ship for a jump," Ilara said. "We need to be there in 12 hours, no longer. If this is really a Deathworlder fleet, the situation will deteriorate fast." "Aye, Commander," Cale replied, his fingers already tapping on the console to set the jump coordinates. Ilara turned toward the rest of the crew. The Horizon wasn't a warship. She wasn't built for sustained combat, but she'd seen her share of skirmishes. Even so, the idea of facing a fleet of Deathworlders was an entirely different kind of danger. She hoped, prayed even, that the transmission had been a mistake, a hoax, or something less dangerous. But as she stared out the bridge's viewing portal into the cold expanse of space, she knew that hope was a luxury she could no longer afford. The ship lurched, the familiar shift of faster-than-light travel making the crew briefly unsteady as the stars blurred around them. The ship's AI, a quiet and efficient entity called Lice, gave a soft beep as the jump sequence finished. "We've arrived," Kyle reported, pulling up the system's layout on the bridge display. He glanced at the view screen, nothing on long-range sensors, just empty space. But the emptiness didn't sit well with Ilara. It felt wrong. The Lorian expanse had always been a region known for strange readings, gravitational anomalies, and random bursts of radiation. But something about this system felt different, more oppressive, more silent. "Scan for any signs of distress," Ilara ordered, "and keep an eye on the sensor readings for anything out of the ordinary." Ailes' fingers flew across his console, his expression tense. "I'm picking up faint residual energy readings from the direction of the mining colony, Commander. But it's old. Over a year old. Maybe longer. There's no sign of activity. And yet, there's something off about it. Set a course for the colony. Maximum speed. Bring up the shields, Ilara instructed, her voice sharp with urgency. Aye, Commander, Kale replied, his fingers already adjusting the ship's vector. The horizon cut through the void of the expanse, its engine sending out subtle ripples of force as it edged closer to its destination. The station was a relic, a once thriving mining outpost, now reduced to little more than a hulk of rusting metal floating in the deep. The colony had been abandoned years ago, long before Ilara's time, when the resources it had mined ran dry and its owners lost interest. There was no reason anyone should be here now, and yet the distress signal had originated from this very place. As the ship neared the station's orbit, the view screen displayed the battered image of a massive derelict structure. Its hull was pitted and torn in places, the result of decades of exposure to space. A low hum resonated from the station's wrecked communications array, and the view was a silent, almost desolate thing, unmoved by time or weather, but unsettling all the same. Status, Ilora asked. Shields holding at 90%, Lieutenant Kale replied. We're in range of the station now, Commander, should we initiate docking procedures. Let's go slow, Ilara said, eyeing the debris field that surrounded the station. Keep a tight formation and stay sharp. This place feels wrong. The ship docked with a low hiss as the airlock sealed itself to the station's entry hatch. For a moment, there was only the eerie stillness of space. Then the airlock doors slid open with a metallic groan, and Ilara's boots clanged on the metal surface of the station's deserted docking bay. Her crew followed, rifles in hand, their faces grim and wary. Stay alert, no heroics, Ilara cautioned as she moved toward the central corridor. The lights flickered on as they moved deeper into the station, revealing darkened halls and forgotten equipment. There was a faint odor in the air, a mix of stale air, old electronics, and something else. Something metallic and faintly burning. The power levels were low, the station barely holding together after so many years of neglect. Yet it seemed maintained, just enough to keep running. It didn't add up. Shouldn't this place be completely dark? Kale muttered, his voice tight with tension. Someone's been here recently. The power's still on. Ilara said nothing, her instincts on high alert. She moved toward the command center, scanning every corner, every shadow. As they approached the main control room, a sudden noise, a soft, mechanical whirring, echoed in the distance, followed by an ominous hiss from the ventilation system. Her hand hovered over the comms. This is Commander Juno. If anyone's alive, respond. Nothing. No response. The eerie quiet only deepened as they approached the command center. Inside, a large holoscreen flickered to life, showing a distorted image. The static noise was almost unbearable, a high-pitched screech that made Ilara's teeth ache. The fleet is here. It's too late. We are already dead. I'm sorry. He turned toward the cabin seal. Dante, I have to finish this, she said, placing her hand on his arm. He dunked the scribble from his eyes. Now, the transmission cut off abruptly. Ilara's heart pounded as she moved toward the console, trying to trace the signal's source. The monitors showed only a ghostly image of a man, someone she didn't recognize, standing amidst chaos. The images were fragmented, and the man's eyes were wide with terror. He was mouthing something, but the message had been lost in the static. Can you trace the origin? Kale asked, his eyes glued to the screen. I'm trying, Ilara said, but it's too garbled. Whatever happened here, it's not natural. There was a sharp beep from one of the consoles, and a new message flashed on the screen. It was encrypted, the letters scrambled and unreadable to anyone but the most advanced systems. "Try to decrypt it," Ilara ordered. Cale worked furiously, his fingers moving like lightning across the console. Finally, the encryption fell away, revealing a clear message. His breath caught as he read it aloud, his voice barely a whisper. "You are being watched. Do not trust what you see. The Deathworlders are coming, and they are not what you think," replied the as the reasons for a dumpster was left hanging from the tree. A cold shiver ran down Ilara's spine. Suddenly the station's lights flickered again, this time more violently. A heavy thud echoed through the metal halls, followed by another, and another. It wasn't the usual creaking of a derelict structure. This was something else, something living. "Get back to the ship, now," Ilara barked. She turned, her heart pounding as the crew scrambled to follow her. But the corridors seemed longer now, their shadows deeper, as if the very station had come alive to trap them. The thuds grew louder. And then, over the comms, a voice crackled to life. It wasn't human. It wasn't even close. "We are watching, and you are ours." The title comes from nature, for the original essence of it. Letter titled. The voice was deep, guttural, a terrible resonance that reverberated through the walls of the station, the floor beneath their boots. Ilara's hand tightened around her rifle as she ordered the crew into a sprint, but the doors to the docking bay slammed shut before they could reach them. They were trapped. The Deathworlders were here, and they were not what anyone had ever expected. The horizon drifted silently in orbit around the ancient, deteriorating mining station, the crew's nerves fraying as the oppressive quiet of the Lorian expanse closed in around them. Commander Ilara Juno stood at the helm, eyes scanning the dark void outside the bridge's viewing portal. There appeared questions that she quit out. Despite its apparent desolation, there was something about it, something unnatural that sent chills down her spine. The message had been clear enough, a faint SOS transmission from a system just outside the expanse warning of a fleet on the move, a fleet unlike any they had encountered before. The Deathworlders. Their name was whispered in fear across the galaxy, a legend of a race so brutal and advanced that even the most hardened fleets hesitated to engage them. At the horizon, we stood here and now. Illyrian had known that when they answered the call, they would be stepping into something beyond their understanding. What she hadn't prepared for was the unease settling into her bones, the feeling that they were already too late. "Commander," Calethorn's voice cut through her thoughts. "We're approaching the secondary docking bay. Power levels are fluctuating, bro. It's like the station is on life support." Ilara turned toward the lieutenant, her sharp gaze meeting his as he continued to monitor the system. "Any sign of life?" she asked, her voice calm, though her insides were anything but. Cale shook his head. "Not on the scanners. There's nothing. No heat signatures. No comms. It's as if the station's abandoned, but we know it." Ilara nodded. The sensors were detecting faint, intermittent pulses of energy coming from the station, but they were weak, scattered. It was as if someone, or something, Friestkassen, was trying to "Prepare the crew for a landing," Ilara ordered. "Weapons ready, shields at maximum, no mistakes." Her command was met with swift acknowledgement, and moments later the horizon descended toward the station, gliding through the inky blackness of space as the crew silently braced for what was to come. The docking bay doors creaked open with a sharp hiss, the faint light of the station flickering to life as the airlock sealed around the horizon's hull. The crew disembarked quickly, their boots making hollow clacks against the cold metal floor. The space around them felt unnervingly quiet, the sort of silence that only seemed to grow louder with each passing moment. "Stay sharp," Ilara murmured, leading the way through the docking bay. Her rifle was slung across her back, her fingers brushing against the familiar grip as she moved. The others followed closely, weapons drawn, eyes scanning every corner of the bay. The station was old, and so old that it looked as though it had been forgotten by time. Long corridor stretched out before them, the collectional wall stretched out before them, walls pitted with rust and neglected, like no lights in a military panel that has cast an unnatural world. Everything's off, Kale muttered under his breath. This place feels like a tomb. It's been abandoned for years, Ilara said. They moved deeper into the station, the air growing thicker as they traversed darkened halls. The flickering lights cast strange, jagged shadows across the wall, the long corridors seeming to stretch on forever. As they approached the command center, the eerie quiet was broken by a sudden faint sound, as though the station was alive and breathing, as though it was waiting for something's not right, Ilara said, her voice low as they halted just outside the control room. She held up her hand, signaling for the crew to stop. Commander, Kevis said, his voice tight with tension. I'm picking up a signal. Weak, but it's there. The rest of the crew tensed, eyes flicking toward Kale as he manipulated the console in front of him. The signal was faint, buried in layers of static, but it was unmistakable, an SOS. But it wasn't like the one they had received before. This one was different, more distorted, more fragmented. Do you think it's the same source? Ilara asked, her mind racing as she listened to the garbled transmission. She could barely make out the words, but what she heard made her stomach tighten with dread. The fleet is here. It's too late. We are already dead. The transmission cut out abruptly, leaving only static in its wake. The cold knot in Ilara's stomach tightened further. Whoever had sent the distress signal was no longer alive, but their final message remained a warning. It's coming from deeper inside, Kale said, his eyes scanning the data on his console. I can't pinpoint the exact location, but the source is definitely further down. We need to move. Without another word, Ilara nodded. She motioned for her team to follow, and they made their way through the station's narrow, winding passages. The further they descended, the more alien the surroundings became. The walls were lined with strange markings, symbols and glyphs that no one on the crew recognized. Some looked like ancient scripts, if not Cruz-like. There were sections of the station that seemed almost organic, with walls that curved in ways that defied standard engineering. The deeper we go, the worse this place feels, Kale muttered, his rifle raised. This isn't just an abandoned station, it's something else. It's like... Stay focused, Ilara said, her voice a sharp whisper. She didn't need to tell them to stay on guard. They already knew, but the dread in the pit of her stomach was growing by the second. As they reached the lowest level of the station, they found a small control room tucked away in the farthest recesses of the station. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of burnt electronics, the hue of relic. Hold it! Ilara shouted, her voice cutting through the quiet. The crew raised their weapons, aiming them at the figure. The man didn't respond. His shoulders heaved with every breath, but he remained motionless as though he hadn't heard them. Ilara's hand went to her rifle, her eyes narrowing as she advanced cautiously. Who are you? She demanded. What happened here? The man turned slowly, his eyes wide and wild. His face was gaunt. You're too late, he rasped, his voice a hoarse whisper. They're already here, the Deathworlders. We thought we could hold them off, but they're too strong, too relentless. They know everything. They can see everything. What do you mean? Ko pressed, stepping forward. What did they do to you? The man's hand twitched toward a console, and before anyone could react, he slammed his fist against the panel, causing a castle of static to fill the room. The lights flickered again, and this time with a violent intensity that sent a wave of panic through the crew. They're coming, madman, he croaked. But before he could finish, there was a sound, a low rumbling vibration that shook the station's walls. It wasn't the rumble of collapsing maturity. It was something massive, something resonate in the very core of the station. And then the voice came in. "You are being watched." The words seemed to reverberate through the room, through the walls, through the very air itself. The figure at the console let out a strangled cry, his body spasming as if the words were physically ripping him apart. The walls groaned, the room shuddering under the pressure, and then, in the flickering light, Ilara saw it. A shadow, a massive shape moving beyond the thin veil of this station's decaying infrastructure. It wasn't a ship, it wasn't human, and it wasn't something that could be explained by any of the technology the crew had ever known. The Deathworlders were, he heard, and they were not what anyone had imagined.